close your eyes. Take a deep breath. For a moment, let go of time. Lift the walls that separate the ages. Let this breath draw in not only the air, but also the echoes of thousands of years past. For now, I will take you to the edge of one of humanity's oldest and most captivating mysteries, Atlantis. On the horizon, the sun slowly rises. The sky is a canvas where yellow and pink dance together. The mist above the sea begins to lift. And there, in the distance, on the line where blue meets blue, you almost see the ghost of a continent that is said to have once risen. The waves seem to speak a language of their own, singing, humming, the final breaths of a people and a civilization submerged by the waters thousands of years ago. This is not merely a legend, it is humanity's courage to dream about its own past. Atlantis is not just a lost continent, it is the name of humanity's longing for lost knowledge, virtue, and balance. The sea, it seems to hide everything: wars, loves, gods, and catastrophes. Yet the sea does not forget. It pretends to forget. The story of Atlantis is like a reflection on the water's surface. When you look at it directly, it slips away. But if you glance aside for a moment, the ghostly shape reappears, like a face remembered in a dream, familiar, yet never fully tangible. The ocean here is not just a metaphor. Atlantis itself is a child of the sea. According to legend, it was a land blessed by Poseidon, the god of the seas, and entrusted to his favored son, born of a mortal woman, Atlas. Atlantis, the land of Atlas. Imagine it, a massive island surrounded by concentric rings of water. At its center, a radiant white temple, with marble towers rising around it, silver roads and gates adorned with gold. Canals stretch out to the harbors, each a marvel of meticulous engineering. Fields are lush and forests vibrant. The people are knowledgeable, balanced, and harmonious. Here, everything flows in order. Science and nature coexist in perfect unity. The line between humans and gods is woven with respect and faith. Perhaps the concept of utopia as we understand it today first took shape here. But every legend has a crack, and the weakest point of every perfect creation arises from within. Atlantis was no exception. The fate of Atlantis remains unknown even today. Yet the sea may carry its traces in memory. That invisible story, lying in the depths and walking above time, waits to be discovered only by those brave enough to ask the right questions. As humanity, why are we so attached to Atlantis? Why do we still search for it, write books about it, make films, and create theories? Perhaps the answer is this: Atlantis is us. Atlantis is the meeting point of humanity's highest ideals and its darkest desires. The destruction of Atlantis serves as a reminder of the potential for collapse we carry within our own triumphs. It all began around 360 BC, with the pen of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. His dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, first introduced Atlantis to the world. But his account was far from a dry historical record. Plato described Atlantis in such vivid and detailed terms that it was as if he had been there, seen it, and returned. His storytelling blurred the line between reality and imagination. The words he used to describe Atlantis painted not only a place but also a way of life, a system of values, and a philosophy of ethics. Perhaps Atlantis was Plato's allegory for an ideal state. Perhaps the downfall of this ancient civilization was a philosophical warning about the inevitable consequences of power intoxication. But perhaps Plato knew something. Perhaps his words were not just metaphor, but the echo of a real memory of Atlantis. This is why Atlantis is more than a story. Atlantis is a call. That whisper rising from the depths of history leads you to the door of the unknown. Beneath the waves, the same question grows within anyone who wishes to discover a truth that has slept for thousands of years. Was it real? But even more importantly, even if it wasn't real, why does it feel so real? Because Atlantis is not just a dream of the past, it is a dream of the future, a vision of a society, an order, and a meaning humanity wishes to rebuild. And like every great dream, it may be hiding in the darkest depths of the sea. The story of Atlantis is one of the oldest and most captivating legends ever told on Earth. But the person who told it was neither a poet, nor a seer, nor a sailor. It was one of ancient Greece's greatest philosophers, Plato. In the 4th century BC, in his two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he described Atlantis in such vivid detail that the existence of this continent has remained alive in human imagination for thousands of years. Was it merely a product of his imagination, or did Plato truly have knowledge of a secret? The story is not told through Plato himself, but through one of his characters, Critias. Critias says, "This tale comes from the oldest members of my family, from Solon." Solon, one of the 7 sages of Athens, was both a philosopher and a statesman. One day, Solon traveled to ancient Egypt. There, at a temple in the city of Sais, he spoke with Egyptian priests. The priests told him something extraordinary. Beyond the Atlantic Ocean, there was a great island. Here lived a civilization so powerful and advanced that it intended to dominate the entire world. Yet one night, the island was destroyed by massive earthquakes and floods. In a single night, it sank beneath the waves, remaining only as a legend. Solon recorded the story upon returning to Athens, but his lifetime was not enough to complete it. Generations later, his grandson Critias passed it on. Plato then incorporated this narrative into his works, but his account was far from superficial. Atlantis was described not merely as an island, but as a detailed city with an organized societal structure. At its center lay a sacred area dedicated to Poseidon. According to the legend, Poseidon made this island his home, fell in love with a mortal woman who lived there, and fathered children with her. He entrusted the island to his first son, Atlas, hence the name Atlantis, the land of Atlas. The center of Atlantis was surrounded by concentric rings. Intertwined rings of land and water acted as natural moats, protecting the island while offering aesthetic order. Bridges, canal systems, and artificial harbors connected these rings, showcasing Atlantis's advanced engineering. Temples were adorned with gold, silver, and a reddish metal called orichalcum. Palaces featured vast courtyards surrounded by columns. Poseidon's temple contained a colossal statue of the god, so magnificent it silenced all who beheld it. The statue depicted Poseidon riding a chariot pulled by seahorses, surrounded by statues of his sons. The people of Atlantis were not merely focused on aesthetics. They highly valued knowledge, education, and order. Children began learning geometry, astronomy, and philosophy at a young age. Athletic competitions were held, and the population offered thanks to the gods through grand ceremonies. Fertile lands allowed 2 harvests per year, and the canal system constantly irrigated agricultural fields. Maritime trade flourished, with ships from the harbors carrying Atlantis's products across the world. Artisans, jewelers, philosophers, and engineers all played a part in the daily life of this unique civilization. But no grandeur lasts forever. The fall of Atlantis was as dramatic as its rise. According to Plato, the people gradually forgot their divine origins. Rulers descended from Poseidon succumbed to mortal weaknesses. Pride, greed, and ambition spread throughout society. Atlantis no longer contented itself with prosperity alone. It sought to conquer other lands, setting its sights on Athens. Yet the gods could not ignore this arrogance. Atlantis had disrupted its harmony with nature. The cosmic balance had been shaken. Then, disaster struck. Massive earthquakes shook the island, the sky darkened, and rain poured from above. The sea rose. Enormous waves swallowed the city walls. Temples were submerged one by one. The people tried to escape, but it was in vain. Golden palaces, gilded towers, libraries of knowledge, and great scholars all vanished in a single night. Atlantis no longer existed. It remained only as a memory buried in the depths of the sea. This is how Plato described Atlantis, neither a simple fairy tale nor an ordinary historical account. Atlantis both existed and did not exist. Through this narrative, Plato depicted an ideal society while warning humanity of the dangers of corruption. Atlantis was more than a place. It was a lesson, a story of a society where wisdom and power combined, yet could rot under the weight of arrogance. Plato never had the chance to complete the narrative. The Critias dialogue ends abruptly as it recounts the fall of Atlantis. Whatever happened, happened there. Perhaps Plato deliberately left the story unfinished. Perhaps it was an invitation for humanity to find its own answers. After all, the location of Atlantis is unknown, and no ruins remain, but its traces still echo in the deepest corners of our imagination. Even today, we ask whether Atlantis was real. But perhaps the right question is this: does it matter whether Atlantis existed? Perhaps Atlantis is about what we believe, what we have lost, and most importantly, what we wish to rebuild. Plato's writings have guided those seeking answers for thousands of years, and through the legend he penned, we continue to dream of that lost continent. Imagine a dream. Picture an island in the middle of the ocean, nearly the size of a continent. The sky is always clear, and the stars shine every night, guiding like a compass. The island is shaped by the most generous hands of nature. Its coasts are not jagged, but almost a perfect circle. This form is like a signature of divine perfection in architecture. This is Atlantis. At the center of Atlantis stretches a vast plain. Miraculously flat, its soil is so fertile that it yields not once, but twice a year. The land is covered with agricultural fields. Rivers flowing from this soil merge with streams from the mountains, providing water for drinking and irrigation. Everything is orderly, systematic, and planned. There is no place for chance, for this island is shaped not only by nature, but by conscious design. And at the heart, this is where Atlantis beats. In the very center, a perfect city rises, woven from 3 circular water rings and the lands between them. This unique structure resembles a nested target: water, land, water, land, water, land. Bridges connect the rings, each built according to precise mathematical ratios. At the center stands the sacred area, the Temple of Poseidon. The temple is not merely a place of worship, it is also the center of governance. Inside, the walls are covered with orichalcum, a reddish metal. The ceiling is adorned with gold. Mosaic floors gleam. At its heart stands a colossal statue on a throne, Poseidon, holding his trident, riding a chariot drawn by hippocampi, with his sons kneeling around him. This is not only a work of art, but a symbol of divine oversight over the people. Within the rings of the city, everything works in harmony with nature. The canals serve not only for transport, but also as part of the city's defense system. Ships navigate these circular pathways, to reach the harbors. Trade vessels carry goods to massive marketplaces. Artisans, jewelers, philosophers, each lives within the order of the rings. The city functions like a living organism, every part purposeful, every unit intentional. The people of Atlantis revered science and art. Education began at an early age. Children learned astronomy, geometry, and natural philosophy. They studied the stars, deciphered the rhythm of numbers, and appreciated the order in nature. Philosophy was not merely an academic pursuit, it was part of daily life. In Atlantis, knowledge was considered the inheritance of the gods. But this civilization thrived not only on knowledge, but also on harmony. Everything was interconnected. Social classes were not alienated, but cooperative. Rulers were philosophers, and philosophers also worked the land. The people remained connected to the gods. Their worship, festivals, and ceremonies surrounding birth and death united the community. During the annual festival of Poseidon, the populace offered thanks to the gods, danced, recited poetry, and the youth competed in spear-throwing contests. This was not just a religious observance, it was a ceremony of unity. The economy of Atlantis was wealth itself. The island was rich in gold, silver, copper, and orichalcum. This wealth was not merely for luxury, but also the foundation for an advanced infrastructure. Massive aqueducts, sewage systems, stone-paved roads, tall towers, bustling markets, and harbors, all demonstrations of Atlantean engineering genius. Modern city planners would marvel at such a system. For the Atlanteans, nature was not merely a resource, but a partner. Towering lighthouses were built atop mountains, guiding sailors with their beams. Forests were not just timber reserves, but sacred spaces. Shamans who communicated with animals and collaborated with the spirits of nature were among the most respected figures in society. But was everything so sacred, systematic, and peaceful? Number, hidden within beauty, was a danger, insatiability. Over time, small cracks began to appear in this perfect order. Not moss on the canal walls, but pride in hearts started to grow. Ambition replaced knowledge. Power struggles replaced harmony. Yet we have not reached that point. Atlantis is still breathing at this moment, and this breath echoes in the stones, in the waters, in the stars. This was Atlantis, a society in perfect harmony with nature, an architectural epic where science met aesthetics, a tangible form of an ideal humanity may never reach again. Words alone cannot convey Atlantis. It was not merely a place to live, but a reality to feel. Perhaps that is why people still search for the lost continent. Many see it not on maps, but in their dreams, because Atlantis is not just an island. Atlantis is the memory of what has been forgotten, and for those who remember, it is a homeland never truly lost. In the beginning, everything seemed as though it had been shaped by the very hands of the gods. Atlantis had become the greatest civilization on Earth. There was no other society that could rival it, a culture woven with knowledge, wealth, aesthetics, harmony with nature, and an understanding that reached toward the heavens. The line between human and divine was so thin that the Atlanteans lived their lives never forgetting that their lineage was sacred. But time passed, and time transforms everything. As the people of Atlantis began to realize the limits of their power, their gaze turned outward, beyond their island. They were no longer simply a people of knowledge, but a people who governed power. Their technology was so advanced that with great sea vessels, they could easily cross the oceans. For them, the boundless seas were not barriers, but pathways. Wherever they went, They left the peoples they encountered in awe and astonishment, for they brought not only goods for trade, but civilization itself. At first, this expansion was harmless. They built colonies across the seas, creating cultural bridges between East and West. They carried agriculture, architecture, medicine, and astronomy to distant lands. Yet in time, this sharing transformed into a quiet greed. The people who once called themselves carriers of knowledge and civilization grew thirstier for land, for wealth, for power. Eventually, they no longer wished to educate other societies, but to rule over them. What had begun as the journey of the children of the gods was turning into their attempt to take the place of the gods themselves. It was at this moment that the first fractures appeared among Atlantis's rulers. Some leaders still defended wisdom and balance, but others began to draw plans of war in their quest to seize power. Among the kings descended from Poseidon, divisions deepened. Once unity was broken, it spread like a slow but fatal disease through the veins of their civilization. Pride. Children born in the golden age of Atlantis, when grown, began to see the words of their ancestors as if they were in a foreign tongue. For they were born not into struggle, but into splendor, comfort, and luxury. Instead of gazing at the stars, they stared at their own reflections in mirrors. The temples grew silent. Philosophers no longer spoke in palaces, but in the outskirts, for kings wished to hear only their own voices, and the people did nothing but applaud. Slowly, Atlantis shifted from being a society of reason to a society of power. The great harbors were no longer just for trade, but became shipyards for war fleets. The canals carved into the vast plain turned into dams and fortifications. As their defenses grew stronger, their inner peace was torn apart. The temple of Poseidon still stood in splendor, but its voice had fallen silent. The Atlanteans began to believe that no force could stand against them. They turned their eyes to the east. There, a small but resilient city-state existed, Athens. This city would become their first enemy, for Athens refused to surrender its culture, its freedom, and its moral values to Atlantean rule. Atlantis began preparing for war. Fleets were built, weapons were forged, maps were drawn, strategies devised. Armies marched through the mighty gates of Atlantis and set sail upon the open seas. But this was not only a military campaign. It was a challenge to the gods themselves. The children of Poseidon no longer obeyed their divine father. They obeyed their own egos. And at this very point, the tone of the tale shifts, for even when silent, the gods still see. And for those who disturb the balance, the patience of the universe has its limits. According to Plato, the gods would not watch this corrupted civilization any longer. One day, the skies changed. The winds shifted. The light of the sun grew dim. The seas began to rise in strange unrest. And the island silently felt the coming of its end. Yet this was still only the beginning of the collapse. The Atlanteans still dreamed of glorious conquest. Crowds gathered in the squares, kings gave speeches, architects designed taller towers, merchants pursued new trade agreements. Everything appeared normal. Yet beneath the ground, the earth stirred, and in the waters, strange murmurs resounded. One night, a sound rose from the deep. No one knew what it was, but the ground began to tremble. Cracks thundered from the city center, from the temples, from the mountain slopes, filling hearts with terror. The sea seemed to overflow its shell. Shores were swallowed. City walls shifted from their foundations. In an instant, the magnificent structures began to collapse, the towers crumbling. The ships in the harbors were torn apart. People screamed, fled, and prayed to the gods. But it was already too late. Atlantis shook through the entire night. By morning, the sun did not rise. The sky was veiled in dark ash. That great island, that glorious civilization, slowly sank into the depths of the ocean. Palaces, temples, books, libraries, scholars, and secrets, all were erased from the face of the earth, and only a whisper remained, mingled with the sound of waves, echoing for thousands of years. Once, there was a civilization here. But Atlantis is not only the story of a civilization's fall, it is a warning. It tells us that when balance is lost between power and virtue, even the greatest of civilizations can vanish in a single night. And this is why the fall of Atlantis is not just a tale of the past, but a myth spoken also for the future. In the earliest times, everything seemed as if it had been crafted by the very hands of the gods. Atlantis had risen as the greatest civilization on Earth. There was no other society that could compare to it. A culture woven with knowledge, wealth, beauty, harmony with nature, and an understanding that reached toward the heavens. The line between human and God was so thin that the Atlanteans often lived without ever forgetting their divine descent. But time passed, and time transforms everything. As the people of Atlantis began to realize the extent of their power, their gaze shifted beyond their island. They were no longer merely a people of knowledge, they were a people who commanded power. Their technology was so advanced that with their massive sea vessels, they could cross the vast ocean with ease. Endless waters were not boundaries to them, but pathways. Everywhere they went, they left other peoples in awe and astonishment. For they carried not only goods of trade, but also the essence of civilization. At first, this expansion was harmless. They founded colonies across the seas, building cultural bridges between East and West. They brought agriculture, architecture, medicine, and astronomy to distant lands. Yet over time, this generosity turned into a silent greed. The people who once called themselves bearers of knowledge and enlightenment grew ever more thirsty for more land, more wealth, more power. Eventually, they no longer sought to teach other societies, but to rule them. The children of the gods, who had once begun their journey in reverence, now began to set themselves in the place of the gods. It was at this very point that the first cracks appeared among Atlantis's rulers. Some leaders continued to defend wisdom and balance, yet others began to devise plans of conquest to secure power for themselves. Among the kings, descendants of Poseidon, divisions deepened, and when unity was broken, a slow but fatal sickness began to spread through the veins of the civilization: pride. Children born during Atlantis's golden age, when they came of age, found the words of their ancestors foreign, as though in an alien tongue, for they had been born into magnificence, raised in comfort and luxury. Instead of gazing upon the stars, they now gazed into their own reflections. The temples grew silent. The philosophers no longer spoke in the palaces, but in the forgotten corners of the city, for the kings wished to hear only their own voices, and the people did nothing more than applaud them. Atlantis slowly transformed from a society of reason into a society of power. The great harbors no longer served only trade, but became shipyards for war. The vast canals carved into the plains turned into dams and fortifications. As their defenses grew stronger, their inner peace crumbled. Poseidon's temple remained majestic, yet within, the divine voice had fallen silent. The Atlanteans began to believe that no power could stand against them. Their eyes turned eastward. There lay a small but resilient city-state, Athens. This city would become their first true enemy. For Athens refused to surrender its culture, its freedom, and its moral values to the dominion of Atlantis. Atlantis prepared for war. Fleets of ships were built, weapons were forged, maps were drawn, strategies devised. Armies marched through the great walls of Atlantis, setting out to the open seas. Yet this was not merely a military campaign, it was also a defiance of the gods. For the children of Poseidon no longer obeyed their deity, but their own egos. And it is at this moment that the tone of the story shifts. For though the gods may remain silent, they still see. And for those who disturb the balance, the patience of the cosmos has limits. According to Plato, the gods could no longer bear to watch a civilization that had corrupted the very soul of humanity. One day, the sky changed. The winds turned, the warmth of the sun dimmed, the seas began to swell in strange and violent ways, and the island quietly sensed that its end was near. Yet this was only the beginning of the collapse. The Atlanteans still dreamed of a glorious victory. The people gathered in the squares, the kings gave speeches, architects designed taller towers, merchants sought new trade deals. Everything appeared normal, yet beneath the soil, tremors stirred. Within the waters, an ominous rumbling echoed. Then one night, a sound rose from the deep. None could understand what it was, but the earth began to shake. Cracks burst forth from the city center, from the temples, from the mountainsides. Fear gripped the hearts of the people. The sea swelled, as if it had overflowed from its own shell. The shores were swallowed. The mighty walls of the city began to shift. In an instant, magnificent structures crumbled, towers collapsed. Ships in the harbors were shattered. People screamed, fled, begged the gods for mercy. But it was already too late. Atlantis trembled throughout that night. And when dawn should have come, the sun did not rise. The sky was covered in a shroud of dark ash. The great island, the magnificent society, slowly sank into the depths of the ocean. Palaces, temples, books, libraries, scholars, and secrets, all were erased from the face of the earth. And only a whisper remained, a murmur carried in the sound of the waves, echoing for thousands of years. Once there was a civilization here. But Atlantis is not merely the tale of a fallen society. It is a warning, a story that reminds us that when power is not balanced by virtue, even the greatest of civilizations can vanish in a single night. And thus the fall of Atlantis is a tale told not only for the past, but also for the future. And so, Atlantis vanished beneath the waves. The waters closed over the once mighty towers, the temples that had touched the heavens, the libraries that held the secrets of stars and seas. The proud ships that once commanded the oceans were crushed like twigs beneath the roaring tide. What had taken centuries to build, what had been praised as the greatest achievement of humankind, was erased in a single night of wrath. Yet the story of Atlantis does not end with its destruction. For when a civilization falls, its ruins are not only made of stone, they are etched into the memory of humankind. And memories, unlike cities, cannot be drowned. The survivors, few though they were, carried fragments of their knowledge across the seas. They whispered of the city that shone like gold, of canals that sparkled under the moonlight, of towers that rivaled the mountains themselves. Some of them found refuge in distant lands, their tales passed down through generations, becoming myths, then legends, then warnings. And so, even though Atlantis was gone, its spirit lingered, hidden in the songs of sailors, in the writings of philosophers, in the dreams of poets. But Atlantis was never only about a place. It was about the eternal struggle between greatness and greed, between wisdom and arrogance. At its height, Atlantis represented the best of what humanity could be: enlightened, harmonious, united with nature and the cosmos. And at its fall, it revealed the deepest flaw in humanity: the inability to hold power without succumbing to pride. The gods did not destroy Atlantis out of cruelty, but out of balance. For when mortals claim the throne of the divine, when they forget humility, the scales of the universe must be set right again. The drowning of Atlantis was not just a catastrophe, it was a cosmic correction. And perhaps that is why the tale has endured for millennia. It is not merely a story of the past. It is a mirror held up to the present. Every empire that has risen since then, every nation that has dreamed of eternal power, has felt the shadow of Atlantis at its back. The Roman legions, the Persian kings, the empires of the East and the West, all have carried within them the same spark of brilliance and the same danger of pride. So what, then, is Atlantis? A city, a myth, a warning, or perhaps all three at once? Maybe it lies at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, waiting for divers to uncover its marble streets. Maybe it was never meant to be found in the sea at all, but in our hearts, in the way we choose to live, to rule, to dream. For if Atlantis was truly lost forever, why does it still live so vividly in our minds? Why do we still search for it, not only with maps and compasses, but with longing? The answer is simple. Because Atlantis is not only a memory of what was, but a question of what could be. If we could learn from their triumphs, without repeating their downfall, if we could hold wisdom higher than ambition, if we could walk in balance with power, instead of being consumed by it, then perhaps Atlantis would not be a warning, but a prophecy. Until that day comes, the waves will continue to whisper. They will remind us that nothing built on arrogance can last, and that every age of greatness carries within it the seed of its own destruction. The sea remembers, the earth remembers, and somewhere, beneath the silent waters, Atlantis sleeps, not gone, but waiting. Perhaps one day, when humanity is ready, it will rise again, not as a city of stone and gold, but as an ideal reborn. Until then, Atlantis remains what it has always been: a lost world, a haunting memory, and an eternal mirror of ourselves. And so, the legend endures.